So now let's talk about a few solutions that can help you get to a place where the land environment in the countries where you're working is a bit stronger, a bit more transparent, a bit more accessible, a bit more helpful to the people on the ground who are ultimately your beneficiaries. You probably need a variety of tools, solution tools, a variety of approaches to address land tenure needs in the countries where you'll be working. Fortunately, we have some overarching guidance about what good land governance should look like and what it can be composed of. The most important of these is the CFS's voluntary guidelines on the responsible governance of tenure of land, fisheries, and forests. The acronym for this new document is the VGGT. The VGGT was endorsed in 2012, and it lays out principles and provides high-level definitions of best practices across a range of subtopics that are covered by the land governance sector. So the VGGT has high-level guidance related to protections of customary rights, protections of people who hold informal rights to land, very strong emphasis on gender and women's rights. Also deals with issues such as investment and land valuation. The VGGT were carried out through multi-stakeholder negotiations with governments, civil society, and private sector participation, and so represent an important consensus around what it means to engage in good land governance today. Another very helpful tool that you might look to as you're doing land programming is the World Bank's Land Governance Assessment Framework. This tool, created by the World Bank with assistance from many other actors, provides you with a benchmarking and scoring system that's composed of 27 different indicators related to land with 120 different dimensions. So for folks who haven't worked in the land sector before, the Land Governance Assessment Framework may seem a little bit overwhelming, but there can be important and useful indicators inside the LGAF that you might wish to adopt or modify a bit for some of your programming indicators. It does cover core land governance topics, but it doesn't cover all the topics that are included in the voluntary guidelines. So if you're in a country where questions around restitution are important, for example, you might want to take a look at what the VGGT suggests you do around restitution. The LGAF won't cover that. So what can you do to help drive progress related to land tenure and property rights in the countries where you're working? Well, here are 5 suggestions. These are pretty practical suggestions. The first is, be sure to understand the different tenure systems that exist in the environment where you're working and in the specific implementation sites that your project is going to impact. So that means understand if the place where you're working is governed primarily by customary tenure systems or primarily by the formal tenure system, or if those two systems are overlapping in the areas where you're working. Number 2, it's very important to recognize that women and other vulnerable groups, this could be youth, it could be the elderly, it could be pastoralists, oftentimes have very different land tenure and property rights and obligations as compared with men and other elites. So understanding how changing rules will impact not just the leaders of a community, but will impact other members of a community is critically important. Number 3, we'd like for you to understand that land tenure and property rights powerfully affect the way people act. Land tenure and property rights can create positive incentives by creating a more secure environment, more secure expectations about the future for people, and conversely, weak land tenure and property rights can create negative incentives to invest or to conserve. So understanding the relationship between the security of the rights and the access and the incentives to protect, conserve, or invest is really important. Fourthly, you can be an advocate for including land tenure and property rights as a cross-cutting theme in your organization's planning and budget processes. if you're engaged in interagency discussions, you can bring land tenure and property rights as a potential issue to the table in discussions with colleagues and with other partners. And then finally, you can help drive some progress in this field by including accountability and learning around this sector in the work that you're doing. So let's talk about a couple of takeaway messages now about land tenure and property rights. A high-level message, and I think one that many of the other speakers will be emphasizing for you over the coming weeks, is that nuance really matters. Land tenure and property rights has in the past been an oversimplified issue, and an issue that's been under-attended to. Politics, economics, social, and cultural forces are all at play when we're discussing land tenure and property rights. It's not an easy sector. In fact, it's a pretty complicated sector. It's a complex issue. It doesn't mean, though, that we can't make important change, especially incrementally. But it is important to recognize that nuance does matter here. It's also important to avoid overgeneralization and to use the right language and the right words, just as it is in any sector. We don't want to confuse people when we're talking about land tenure and property rights issues. We don't want to oversimplify what is a complicated environment, and oversimplification and wrong use of words can in some cases do more harm than good. A second takeaway message would be that rules and practices that govern how people access and use land and other natural resources are not static, they're not set in stone, and they're not really universal. So whether we're talking about formal or informal governing bodies, rules will change over time. These rules will adjust and they'll evolve in response to those forces we talked about earlier, whether it's rises in population, changes in technology, or ideological changes. So the way that history happens means that we will, in many environments, have multiple systems of land and resource governance at play at the same time and overlapping. So be attentive to that. And then finally, in many places we are at a critical juncture. We don't have a lot of time left to waste in terms of delivering effective land tenure solutions to the poor and in fact to the non-poor alike. It's critically important that we shelter people who are poor and lack shelter. It's critically important that we feed people into the future. It's essential that we become more climate smart and build peaceful environments where people can work together to create prosperity. Solutions have to work for the particulars of your environment, of course, so we need to be context specific when we address land tenure and property rights issues. And we also need to be attentive to what different actors, different stakeholders within our programming need and what actually can be delivered in a positive way. Sometimes existing systems function well enough to get us to a better place. They may need a little additional capacity building, they may need a little additional support, but it's important to understand which systems are working well enough and not to inadvertently displace a system that actually is working on the ground for people because we think in our minds that formal must equal good. Sometimes informal is a good system for people on the ground. Sometimes intervening can actually create more conflict, and we certainly don't want to do harm, so we need to be mindful to do no harm in our land tenure and property rights programming. We hope that throughout this course, you'll develop a much stronger understanding and comfort level with this subject matter and this subject area. As I said a moment ago, it can be complicated, but take your time, the terms will come to you, and by the end of the course, you'll be close to a land tenure expert. We also hope that you'll recognize how land issues relate to other critically important development objectives, and more focused discussions on food security, economic growth, gender, and conflict will help cement that message. Finally, we hope that you'll think about how land tenure and property rights can be included in your own work to help create more sustainable outcomes and solutions for people around the world. Again, we encourage you to write to us if you have questions, and to explore the research and the many tools and training materials that you can find on USAID's Land Tenure portal. Thank you so much, and enjoy the next 14 weeks.